Hello, hello. I know I'm basically still speaking to myself just for now. Hi, everyone. Hello there, thanks for joining. Hi, everyone. Okay, see a lot of people are joining. Just gonna wait a couple more seconds. It's very sunny today in Glasgow. I'm very happy. So for once I feel like I have good lighting and stuff. All right. Hi everyone. I guess we can just kick off. Hello and welcome back to yet another Pulse community session. My name is Diana and I am Human Rights Pulse community manager. And today we're going to talk about a very important topic. We're going to talk about intersectionality, feminism, and the law with our guest, Kay Foulkes. Now, it is very important for us to discuss this topic today as it falls very nicely in Human Rights Pulse monthly theme, women's rights. So we thought that would have placed perfectly in this context. And let me just invite very quickly our guest. Okay, let's see. Yeah. Oh no. Just give me 1 second. Yes. Sorry, just one moment. Yes, okay. Folks should be joining, just 1 second. Hi, Kay.
Hi, is that working? Yeah.
Yeah, it's working. No, it's just me
Oh,
you on me, so it was a bit of a long moment there, me trying to just scroll and find your name. How are you?
I'm fine, yeah. Sort of, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Is it your first time on an Instagram live?
Yeah, this is where my age starts to show. People make the mistake of assuming I'm in my late 20s, early 30s, but I'm actually 43 in a couple of weeks, so yeah.
But don't worry, because actually, like I, as a community manager, I actually started this post community session. One would expect I'm in my early 20s, and one would expect a digital agility and all those things, but actually that's not quite. I still feel very clumsy and not perfectly accustomed to the digital media. So don't worry at all. I'm on your same boat, and actually I'm even in a worse position because I am much younger, and I should be, as I said, much more agile. It's working perfectly, so don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that today we're going to discuss intersectionality, feminism, and the law, which is a very important topic, considering our theme rights. So it will be fantastic to hear from this diverse experience and intersectional experience indeed. And I guess I know that you work in Scotland, and I know that you have a varied experience with this. And oh, sorry, I think you cut off right there. Can you hear me all good?
Yeah, sorry, my earphones were not the greatest for that. So
It's my connection. Can the people see us correctly and hear us clear? Can everyone see and hear us? I guess I'll just go on. I think people can do so. So no, yeah, I was just saying, if you can just introduce yourself and talk to us about what you did in the past, what you do, what is the GlassNetwork, and your experiences in Scotland. Yeah, I should have said that this is both me and Kay are in Scotland at the moment, and the GlassNetwork that I'm referring to is a Scottish-based platform. So, Kay, if you want to tell us about it all.
yeah, I think it's yeah, it's very sunny for March, so people might not believe us. We're in Scotland, but yeah. So sort of the Glass Network is the network for, and it's an organisation for LGBT plus legal professionals working in Scotland. So it's not just limited to solicitors and advocates, but it can take in anyone if there's paralegals, legal executive, and since I joined now students. Sort of that's there's now sort of realizing that sort of engagement with students is now becoming much more of a focus, sort of the initial focus being to bring together people from across the profession, and now it's sort of let's also focus on those who are wanting to join the profession so they can get to know them. But I didn't start out wanting to be a lawyer. I kind of became a lawyer by accident. I actually, back in the dark old days of the 1990s, I was at university studying initially engineering, then trying geology, failing badly at both, but at the same time was a platoon commander in the Territorial Army. My dream job was to be an army officer, to be a pilot in the army. That all went awry when I had to sort of make a choice between being myself and continuing with my career in the army. And it was sort of for my own mental health. The army wasn't at that time the best option. Given in any case, it wasn't compatible because back then it was actually illegal to be queer and in the military. It was only after I left that the law actually changed in 2000. So after a while, I found myself in the civil service and ended up in a role called a Home Office Presenting Officer, which is effectively doing the job of an advocate or a barrister or solicitor in the immigration tribunals, but with 4 weeks training and very little legal knowledge, so sort of a specialist civil servant. After leaving the Home Office, I eventually found myself back at the University of Glasgow for my third attempt at a degree at the University of Glasgow. This time I've succeeded, managed to get a law degree, which is, it's like only go for something slightly harder, apparently, each time. Everyone seems to think law degrees particularly challenging, but I found it was something I'm much more adept at. And now just in the last stages of my diploma at the University of Strathclyde, in the same position as many other students at the moment, trying to find myself a training contract, which are sparse as hen's teeth and even sparser at the moment because COVID has not been kind, unfortunately, in the legal profession.
Let me just say, I think I have a visual problem because you just cut off from the screen, and I would want people to actually look at you, not at me, since I'm not speaking. But I don't know if shall we just close this live very quickly and get on to another one? But that wouldn't work. See, you were literally, me and Kay, we were just talking before and we were concerned about technical issues, but is it absolutely me causing that?
I have absolutely no idea.
But do you see yourself? Can people?
I can see myself. I don't know if anyone else can see me.
That should be fine then. Okay. I guess, right before you continue, I actually wanted to ask you, do you know anything more in detail about the change in legislation that actually allows queer people to get into the army now, the ones that occurred in 2000?
It was at that point there were a group of former military people who took a case to the European Court of Human Rights, and it was only through challenging it in the courts. We weren't taken on because of a sudden love for people and they wanted to include us. It was as much of the rights, particularly back then, to get them. It was multiple attempts to go to the ending up in the European Court of Human Rights, and eventually the margin of appreciation would reduce so much that they really couldn't justify it anymore, and it sort of got to that stage but also there had been a change in government at that point after decades of having a a Conservative government. That was New Labour came in '97, and the introduction of the Human Rights Act, which came into effect in 2000, sort of giving the courts in the UK the first time they could actually make decisions specifically in relation to human rights without having to go to the European Court. That's very much, I think, what made a lot of the difference. So very much, I think, in a lot of circles, a fear of the plans to change or to repeal the Human Rights Act that are currently making the rounds in Westminster.
Yeah, indeed. I think there is an independent committee reviewing, doing an independent review at the moment, and it's quite troubling to see. Like, I think we've got an almost, I don't want to say lethal, but quite dangerous mix with COVID and Brexit, and that this is, it could potentially burst any second, and it's yeah, we should keep our eyes peeled and see what happens. But yeah, no, this is very interesting what you say. Like, for example, I had no idea about the rules pertaining to entry requirements into the military. I certainly know the ones in the legal profession, and I will ask you about that in a second. But before asking you about that, I actually wanted to mention two pieces of legislation that I'm sure you're very familiar with, and that would be the Equality Act 2010 and the Gender Recognition Act 2004, I think much more controversially. And since this talk, we titled it Intersectionality, Feminism and the Law, I would really love to hear what your personal experiences are with those pieces of legislation, and see whether you feel protected by them, whether you recognize yourself in them, or whether you think that reform is needed.
I think the Equality Act in many ways was needed. It sort of brought together it was a consolidating act. It didn't create much in the way of new law. Effectively, it sort of brought together a lot of existing laws, and it very much simplified sort of the law. It makes it much more straightforward. You can find it in one place. There were some bad outcomes from that many people, well, what some people would consider bad outcomes, in that we went from having separate equalities bodies to having a single equality body in the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I think that's the right name for it, yeah. I think that was particularly in relation to race equality and disability equality. There's that feeling that the Equality and Human Rights Commission hasn't served the needs of the communities quite in the same way, because their focus is very much split and not focused on one particular issue. And I think it's a fine piece of legislation. It has some effect, but it's one that's very much ignored by many. Like, you've got the legislation, but the actual enforcement and how seriously it's taken is quite limited. Sort of the people just don't always take those issues seriously. And I think for myself, around disability, having experienced the challenge of trying to get even minor adjustments, reasonable adjustments, it always comes from the thing of, well, why do you want special treatment? And it's sort of, well, no, I'm not looking for special treatment. I'm just looking for some flexibility so that I'm able to do what everyone else is doing. And I very much sort of have seen, whereas I've had challenges, I do have friends that have had significantly worse challenges, including a friend who's blind and autistic, and who was also on the law degree at Glasgow, and has had no end of trouble with trying to get they accepted him onto the course, but they weren't willing to do the work to make the course accessible for him, and it's caused no end of challenges for him. And I think it's something that shows that we're talking 1995 was the first Disability Discrimination Act. We're a quarter of a century later, and people still can't get the basics right. But then it's even worse when you look at race and sex discrimination. The Sex Discrimination Act, those are acts that are the 1960s, 70s, and still we're having issues half a century later with people still not getting it right. So I think it's a laudable piece of legislation, but it's just not taken seriously enough. The Gender Recognition Act, it changed the law, but it's a complete and utter mess. It's people can change every single piece of ID apart from their birth certificate simply by effectively writing a letter, maybe with a supporting letter from a doctor. I did that, driving license, passport, everything, changed it back 1999. Even the University of Glasgow changed my records without any challenge. I'll have to say that for everything else they've done, they were actually really good with me back in the late 90s, which was a surprise compared to the fights that other people had at other institutions. So they do get it right sometimes. But the Gender Recognition Act, unfortunately, the issue is, unfortunately, many people place a lot of weight on birth certificates, though in day-to-day life, no one ever uses a birth certificate as a form of ID. It's compared to a driving license or a passport. It's not exactly the most effective piece of ID. It's a piece of paper that anyone can carry around. But very much a lot of weight's placed on that, which is why, and to the extent that we've just had this case in the High Court in England, the judicial review, where the Office of National Statistics has sort of held their hands up and let them have their way, saying that people should be defining their sex in the census in England based on their gender recognition certificate or their birth certificate, which ultimately everyone's going to ignore anyway because the people aren't going to put that down. People aren't relying on that, but it's sort of, it shows how much importance is placed on that certificate. But to get it, you've got to send off a bunch of documents to an anonymous panel to meet the standards that they expect, which aren't always enforced in a consistent manner. You have to go and get reports from approved experts. There were 92 when it originally started. Those 92 that are listed, I think they're down to 69 are actually still practicing. So you have to go and pay these people to get reports if you haven't got it, to go and say to a bunch of anonymous people on the panel, can I get this, and hope that they'll get it through. I went to apply for mine years back and got rejected because I hadn't had surgery, which isn't supposed to be something that is an issue. And to be honest, I just object to the whole process, which is why I haven't done it again. The amount of effort that's gone into getting through everything. So I think the whole thing, there was this hope that the reform of the Gender Recognition Act to make it more about self-ID, as every single other element of your life effectively is with every other document, was more about a practicality. It wasn't about, whereas it's been hijacked and promoted as something that it very much isn't by people who've always been around but have managed to get themselves a particular voice at the moment, which isn't necessarily representative of society in general. But unfortunately, those who shout the loudest often get listened to, and that seems to have been very much the case, both in Scotland and in England when it comes to gender recognition. But I think people aren't giving up on it. We'll get there eventually. It's just going to take a bit longer. That's sort of it's the way that things will be. Sorry, quite a long answer there for.
Expensive one, and in fact, you touched upon some points that I wanted to ask you, but you already mentioned them. I was reading some articles, and indeed they were mentioning the fact that the way the Gender Recognition Act is construed is based on a pathologization and bureaucratic treatment of something that should be self-declaration. And indeed, as you exactly pointed out, it happens with everything. why would you place this emphasis that is absolutely misplaced on a birth certificate that has practically no use, and that also shows some political tendencies at the core, and perhaps also societal rejection of what actually in law should be the case. You even mentioned the surgery requirement. I'm pretty sure that there's not even an actual legal requirement in the Gender Recognition Act to having undergone surgery. I think it reads something like somebody that thinks to undergo surgery or has or will be, but that implies the actual taking practical steps as to have surgery, but not really, because it's not really stated in the law. So I wonder whether, do you know of any legal challenge that has been posed recently?
No, because they're granting people. It's changed. It was just sort of. It was. I don't know, whatever it was. Whoever got my application decided that was an issue. I had to provide more evidence as to why I hadn't had surgery. It being a challenge that the reason I hadn't had it was because I lived in an area where the local NHS refused to fund it. And I just simply hadn't got to the stage where I was able to pay for it myself. So it's that sort of double beating that you're getting from the state. Though that was back then, the situation when it comes to sort of the medical side of things is much worse now. It's the one area that the waiting list requirements doesn't seem to apply to, as you're now heading up, that people are taking years until they can get their first appointment at a clinic. And meanwhile, any alternate options that are put out there, the sort of the institutions of government and of the medical establishment do their best to stop them from running, because they sort of are seen as undermined for whatever reason we can't see. So it's a challenge, but no, I don't think there hasn't been a legal challenge to the Gender Recognition Act and the way it's dealt with, because most people manage to get through it. It's just unfortunately sometimes you don't, and a lot of people just refuse to do it just because of the way that it's dealt with. And it's I don't think anyone has any idea of quite how humiliating it is to go through multiple assessments of your identity and having to justify to someone else who you are, and very much that thing of which is often assessed based on quite outdated gender stereotypes, which are then used to justify fighting against trans people, because it's this idea that we all base our identity on the fact that we wanted to play with dolls and wear dresses when we were younger. And it's like, well, no, I wanted to be in the army. I like running around, blowing things up, shooting guns. I played with Lego. There was nothing particularly there. I haven't changed. I haven't changed much as an adult, but there's that expectation that is just based on these outdated gender stereotypes as to that's what defines who you are.
That is indeed quite appalling to hear, and I was wondering who appoints those independent and anonymous panels that you were mentioning, and is there any form of accountability besides the governmental one to review the decisions of those panels? How do they come about in the first place?
I have no idea who appoints them. I'm assuming it's a gender recognition panel. It comes under courts and tribunals, I think. So I'm assuming it's through the Judicial Appointments Commission that it's done. And yeah, there is the opportunity to challenge it, like any other. The option of a judicial review or anything like that is there, as it is with any administrative decision. As to, I don't know if you can appeal I'm not sure if you appeal the decisions. It's not something I've specifically looked into for a while. Not an expert on the Gender Recognition Act, unfortunately. Other people would definitely be able to answer that question for you.
I always, in terms of accountability and appeals, almost as a default mechanism when we're talking about these topics, which is quite sad because it shouldn't be the place. You should have an easily enforceable legislation in the first place. And you indeed, you pointed out earlier to this problem of enforceability. I wanted to ask you something else about there was this paper that you actually sent me that introduced concepts as legal consciousness and a more social cultural approach to tackling legal norms, a more community-based approach. And I know this is quite a big topic recently, because there's much emphasis being placed on the needs of the communities and understanding the communities to then formulate a normative paradigm. What do you think in that respect?
Yeah, I think it's that idea that very much laws in the past have been made in a very sort of patriarchal way. Sort of its laws are made for the benefit of people that we're going to approach the paternalistic, rather than patriarchal. Sorry, that was it's a paternalistic way. Laws are done to people rather than done with people. And there's definitely been sort of a shift there. I think we saw it more in Scotland initially, like there are consultations go out now to give people the opportunity to contribute to legislation, which wasn't something that happened in the past. It's something you're seeing more down in England in relation to certain pieces of legislation. Other ones are still sort of going through. Other words, it's sort of that involving the community. But it has its disadvantages in that it's open to the entire electorate. So you also get those who don't agree with it, and that can cause things not to advance in the right way. But I guess it's that sort of idea of legal consciousness. It's how people relate to the law, how they understand it. And I think there has been a change in sort of queer communities in how people approach the law, in that rather than the law being something that's done to people, such as the criminalisation of sexual behaviours, or the not being allowed to talk about the clause 28, section 28, which prevented the discussion of LGBT issues in schools. It's sort of, there is this attitude that sort of effectively since the Human Rights Act, law is something that's in many ways has been done with us, that laws are now sort of reflecting what our needs are rather than what other people think should be done to keep us under control. So there is that sort of change, but many people who still find the law quite an oppressive thing, and it's the level of engagement that you have. It's very sort of important, and anyone who's done sort of reading into social theory and looks at the issues of how law is created, how systems work, it's needing that opportunity to have your input, have your contribution to that system, to be part of the narrative, is very important. And we are more than we were in the past. We're no longer invisible. But unfortunately, at the same time, we're not the only ones that are contributing to this conversation. And those who were responsible for the laws that were used to keep us in check in the past are still there and still trying to argue that they, for what they see as their rights, which I think we're now seeing with the reaction to the suggestions in relation to passing laws outlawing conversion therapy. You're now seeing the backlash from sort of evangelicals and even people, the outliers within our own community, in the form of the LGB Alliance, everyone's favourite organisation at the moment, unfortunately. Yeah, favourite, obviously, in inverted commas.
Yeah. I have so many questions after what you said. This is once again troubling to hear, but it is a welcome step that at least slowly but surely we're heading somewhere. So I'm pretty sure, especially with the even with the lockdown, actually, with the impact of digital movements, much more awareness is being spread, and maybe that is going to prompt the electorate to engage into this participatory act of actually shaping the law, because as you said, the law needs to, you need to participate in the creation of the law if you want to have a suitable and feasible system of law. But I had two questions. The first one was whether the GlassNetwork actively participates in such activities. So whether there is anything you have participated in, some law report or law, not report, but recommendation, or you produce something to advise on what the law should be based on evidence from the community. And actually I had a question about the schools. So you mentioned that section 20. I wasn't aware that you are barred, you meaning everyone is actually barred from conducting LGBTQ education in the schools. Is that so?
No, that was from 1989 to, in Scotland, 2000, 2001, England, I think 2003. So it was something that was brought in reaction to the AIDS crisis by the Thatcher government. It was something that was repealed in Scotland first and then in England and Wales afterwards. It was. That's the time that I was at high school, the end of primary school, high school. It was very much teachers would lose their jobs if they were to discuss those matters. So you have a generation of us that in the 1980s, things were becoming more visible. And then in the 1990s, it was very much, it wasn't. It was hidden. It was shameful. It was something in a reaction to, let's say, to the AIDS crisis. It was seen as sort of they were fearful. They were wanting to protect children from being converted to being homosexual, because that's how sexuality obviously works. It's contagious and people can catch it. It's unfortunately, we've now got this that there's now a movement to, there's now people who are trying to do effectively the same, but in relation to trans issues. There's people fighting that are going and using the courts and using legal threats to stop trans issues being taught in schools, because again, it's this idea of a social contagion, that it's something that people can catch. That there's something harmful in allowing young people to even explore their own idea of their gender. That simply allowing people to explore their own gender will ultimately lead them to going down a certain path, which is obviously not the issue. It isn't something that happens. It's not something that anyone that people will rush out and do. Not say anyone. There's always someone that will do it. As if there's anything, there's always someone that will do something that's not right for them, and they'll complain about it later because, and then try to stop anyone else from being able to access it, because it is that attitude that it's better to do a massive amount of harm to all the trans children than it is for one cis child to have to experience, to have a similar experience. And it's quite a sort of harmful. Yeah, it's a challenge. It's seeing the arguments that are put across, seeing the way that things are being treated and being taken seriously. There very much is a lot of concern in the community at the moment. And I think the biggest result of that being the Bell case, where the Keira Bell, which is now limited access for young people to medical treatment, to puberty blockers and to HRT, and has caused immeasurable harm. A system that wasn't working particularly well in any case, but now a bunch of people have interfered with the system and are now causing huge harm, as children are having their children who were on a path to receive treatment are not getting it, even after 3 years and years of trying to get it, and other children are having it threatened to have it taken away. So, I'm not sure I got there from section 28, but sorry, it's saying there are these concerns that it does sort of come along when certain voices are given prominence, and when queer voices aren't included in those conversations at the right levels.
Yeah, yeah. But again, we are like, I think this discourse takes into account, it ought to take into account so many aspects from indeed sociology, and like why would the community be concerned about actually having those conversations? What is the actual harm? I personally find it quite alarming, not only irrational but indeed alarming, that people are concerned of getting educated on certain topics, because there is this historic and societal kind of conception of a social contagion like this, and the only way to dismantle it is to have a conversation, maybe a hard one, maybe a tough one, but if we are not talking to each other, we are not gonna get anywhere. I was talking to another friend the other day, and there's a lot of rage and frustration, and rightly so, from marginalized communities. But she was saying that you can only do so much with rage. You then need to talk. But if talk is even legally barred, we're not gonna head anywhere. So this is quite alarming, as I said. But I wanted to ask you about the Bell case. I'm not I don't have too much knowledge about it, but I guess one question for you would be, what do you think? Do you think that a child in a very early age, I think, was that an age of 12? 12 to 14 or something like that, do you think that they do have capacity as in besides legal capacity, like they fully know and they're ready to undertake such treatment? Or do you see some merit actually in having a bit of discretion or challenge to the fact that they want to undertake treatment?
I think this is a problem. No one ever questions if a cisgender child knows what their identity is. It's just accepted without question. It's as soon as someone says something outside of those sort of expectations, there's that idea of no. And I think the system has become overly cautious. It causes harm. Like the fact that these children are having to justify children with precocious puberty, when they're seen as their puberty has started too early, are given puberty blockers. And it's not necessarily for a medical reason, but more for a social reason, because if they're to have puberty while they're younger than their peers, it's going to cause those issues socially. But if that same child was to seek puberty blockers because they're trans and they don't want to go through that puberty, even while it's sort of just putting things on hold, it's there. But that's what they're there for. Like, puberty blockers would effectively put things on hold. It means that if they want to, they can restart, they can stop them. The processes will go ahead as normal, or they can be supplemented if need be, if there is an issue, or they can go on. They can start HRT. They can continue that process of transitioning. But there's numerous studies that come out about how children who are affirmed in their identity come out with are indistinguishable from their cisgender peers. Their mental health outcomes are indistinguishable, as opposed to those of us who are older, with the issues of much more issues with mental health, just from having gone through an experience that doesn't work. And it's the fact that I think there was a study recently that says children know effectively from birth who they are. They then express it more as they get older. And the thing is, some children are exploring. That's where you use the puberty blockers. It allows them to explore. They can say, is this right for me? They might even take some initial doses of HRT and then go, nope, that's not right for me. But I think with Keira Bell, she was older than that. She has admitted that she has actively avoided the trans community. So who she was talking to, where she was getting her experiences, it's not like there was a discussion there. But also, she wasn't honest with herself, and I think that's part of the problem. But that's part of the problem with the system. Is the system, to get through the system, you have to give a narrative that they expect. So people will be there, and it's the system in itself is harmful rather than sort of allowing children to explore. And ultimately, my response is, what's the harm in allowing a child that ultimately says, actually, no, I'm cisgender, I'm happy with how I was born. Where's the harm in allowing them to explore their identity? Because if that allows numerous trans children to be able to do the same and to not have to deal with the longer term effects. And in any case, up here, Scotland, our law specifically says from age 12. Anyone who's done family law who understands that the law up here says that you start to have capacity from age 12. It's recognised in law, in particular in relation to medical issues. And luckily, despite all the hoo-ha around the Bell case, it was made very clear that our law is different in Scotland. We have a different approach. So children in Scotland are still managing to be seen and treated by the clinicians who run the service up here. But we're very much aware that there are people who want to change that if they can, but as it's in an act of parliament rather than just being based on issues of common law, it's much harder to change up here than it would be down in England, where they don't have it in a statute. It was part of the Gillick competence, is something that's a product of common law rather than statutes. So we have a little bit more protection up in Scotland, but we're aware that if we don't hold the line, that could potentially be undermined.
Yeah.
But sorry. And then in relation to the other thing, no, the GlassNetwork is more like a staff network in many ways. It's not there to do we're not there to do some advocacy, and so it's about supporting those in the legal profession. It's about working with the legal profession to try and improve diversity, because I think it's that idea that if to be part of the conversation again, people have to be there. So it's having visibly people who are visible to those coming into the profession. Like for someone at law school to be able to go and do an internet search and say, is there a gay judge? Is there a trans judge? Are there barristers? Are there advocates? Are there solicitors? And to be able to find those people, it's about that visibility so that young people are seeing themselves reflected in the profession and can see that that's an option for them to take advantage of, but then also to be able to be themselves in the profession rather than there's always been a tendency of many people will be quite outs at university, and then once they go into the professional workplace will be straight back in the closet, and maybe it's sort of that covering aspects of their identity so that they can fit in. And I think we're very much more about just trying to empower people to be more open, but there is that challenge where the article that referred to, the one by Sharon Cowan about whether Scotland is the best place in the world to be trans. But the most openly, when you're talking about in the legal profession, the only open trans person in the legal profession in Scotland is me. And I'm a student. There are people who have said that there are people in the profession, but no one's actually open about their identity. They're not visible. There's no visible role models, and I think that's something I find quite sad. In 2021, we're still in that situation where, for me to find role models, I've had to go down to England to find some absolutely fabulous people who are down there, but in Scotland, not so much.
That says quite a lot about how Scotland is portrayed, or the idea that people might have, and even the paper's title about Scotland being the best place. And actually, when you dig into the things, you realize that there are role models. But it is very, very nice and very laudable of what the GlassNetwork is doing, because you actually have identified a lack, which is this lack of visibility and role modeling, and you're actually actively contributing to creating one, which is absolutely fantastic. So if I can encourage everyone who is listening to us or who will listen to this live, get in touch, go and check this GlassNetwork. I don't know if, of course, this is Scotland, so it might be Scotland. I don't know if any Scottish people are listening to us. But even to see, even if you're not Scottish, but to see what this organization is doing, maybe this could give you an idea to create one of your own, or to talk to someone in your own country and say, this is something that we could do and we could achieve. So that's always an idea.
Oh yeah, and we've got that. We've been doing recently a series of podcasts called the GlassCast, where we're talking to people that we see as role models, LGBT role models. We started out with Stephen Whittle, who's a professor of equalities law down in Manchester, openly trans man who's been involved in the fight for legal rights for quite a long time. And then, so he was our first one at the beginning of LGBT History Month, and our last one was Master Victoria MacLeod, who's the only openly trans judge in the United Kingdom, but she's a Master of the Queen's Bench Division. And we've got more coming, but it's that building up a resource of people to be able to see, here are the queer role models and the allies that we have in the legal profession. There's plenty of them about, but people don't necessarily know who they are. So that's what we're trying to sort of promote ourselves, as well as sort of build those links.
That is absolutely fantastic. I didn't know, I didn't get a chance to listen to those podcasts, but I will. And this is really, really great what you're doing. And I think there is a problem, the whole problem, and this is where intersectionality plays a role in feminism and everything. There is a very outdated concept of things, and especially professionally, and even more specifically, the legal profession. And there is this idea of what a lawyer is and how they look like. And if you don't fit into that idea, your voice is not necessarily factually suppressed, but you feel like it is. So as you said, you either go back to the closet, or you just feel, I don't know, subjugated to this weird societal tacit understanding of what a lawyer is. But again, as I said before, the only way to progress is to introduce progressive ideas and to openly talk about things that should not be a taboo. Like, I think sexuality is a problem that touches upon LGBTQ rights, but also in the feminist discourse in itself. So, for example, just simply being a woman in the legal profession, wearing certain clothes, or behaving a certain way, that would be considered unprofessional. But why is that? According to which standard? And why would we feel, or having, or even more basically, having red hair, having a piercing, having, you know, all those kind of things, they all fall back to the same obsolete historic idea of how a legal professional should look like. So of course, because they all look like that, there is no visibility, there is no diversity of how other people might do. And there is this misconception of, if you don't look like that, so if you are not like that, if you are an openly trans judge, or if you have red hair, or if you are a woman and wear weird clothes, then you as a lawyer, your value as a lawyer is not the same as that of the normal, typical cis men, middle-aged, probably white. And again, the only way is having conversations. Actually, maybe you can tell us, what was your experience throughout university and diploma, and I guess your search for a training contract in that respect? Were you hindered in any way, or did you face outright discrimination?
I think no. I think things have changed very much. I think when I started on the diploma, when I started at university, I wasn't open about about being trans. But I think it was the longer I spent, the more willing I was to do it, because I think there's been a shift in the approach of the sort of this younger generation of lawyers that are coming through, the generation that have matured and sort of had their childhood while with human rights being an everyday part of life. The Human Rights Act is there, equality is an every part of life. So it became easier. It's not like back in the 1990s when no one knew what a trans person was, or if they did, they had a very fixed idea of what it was. So I think I've been able to do it more. There have been some issues with, unsurprisingly, a couple of older white men in significant positions. There's been challenges because, let's say, with me with disability, it's around mental health, because basically that's where I've had my challenges, and I've struggled to get sympathy on occasion with that and to get flexibility with that. But at the same time, there have been some absolutely fantastic people who helped me no end. People who are at Glasgow will know of them. Like there's I had my advisor of studies was Dr. Frankie McCarthy, who is well, she's now Professor Frankie McCarthy. But yeah, those of us who've done property law, who've had her teaching that, will be very aware that she doesn't fit the image of a traditional lawyer in many ways, with her Doc Martens and colourful hair. She's now a Scottish Law Commissioner. She's there again, another person that we've spoken to on the Glasscast. And then other people like Maria, oh God, her name's gone out of my head, and she was my dissertation supervisor.
Maria Fletcher, maybe?
Maria Fletcher, yeah. Who, when you go into her office, she has a pride flag hanging in her office quite visibly. So we have those people. The situation has changed. Things are changing. I think definitely that sort of feminist approach, and those who are more openly feminist, who are less traditional in the way they present and the views that they do, are amazing. And then the article you're talking about, Sharon Cowan, meeting her was fantastic. When I went to, it was a workshop for the Scottish Feminist Judgments project that she was doing with Chloe Kennedy and, oh, I'm awful with names. Vic, oh, her name's gone completely out of my head. Got them all. Sorry, I'm terrible with names. It's not that I don't know who she is. Professor Vicky Monroe. Sorry, and if I combine names.
Don't worry.
But that was my first sort of experience of an openly sort of feminist, queer, positive teaching experience with three very non-traditional sort of two professors and Dr. Kennedy. Just there and teaching them and meeting them, and yeah, it's fantastic to have those opportunities. These are people that didn't exist 20 years ago in legal. When they were going through school, they didn't necessarily have these people, but we're seeing more and more of them. And the Scottish Feminist Judgment Project is a great. It's brilliant. It's sort of this rewriting important legal judgments from a feminist perspective, rather than that sort of paternalistic, patriarchal perspective that most judgments are written from. And it's fascinating to see sort of how they're written, sort of taking into account issues that might not normally be considered by a strict application of black letter law.
You said this rewriting legal judgment under a feminist lens. I think, and I actually know, most people might actually be put off by this thing of rewriting. But then again, I would really like to stress and reiterate that exactly as you said, is not about, you said, positive teaching experience, positive feminist queer experience. It is about this positive and enriching experience. There is this misconception that if we actually talk about these things, either somebody gets harmed, but that's a non-existent harm for the children, or even, I know, gender critical feminist or something, they are saying that if trans women are allowed in certain places, then potential harm might occur, but that's a very fallacious argument. and yeah, what was I saying? That yeah, that either harm is gonna occur, or that somebody's gonna have something less, so that somebody's gonna detract something from them, or that we're gonna rewrite history in a way that does not fit them anymore, which to a certain extent is true, but there are questions in there, because there is a system that has been in place for so long that benefited a very specific portion of the population, and now that we are realizing that things should change, those people are hopping up and saying, "Oh no, wait a second. The solution to this is just to have this open, positive approach." And I'm now saying just to have. This conversation is proving itself that this is very problematic. But I think that is very refreshing for you to tell us how nice it was to have these positive models that, you know, just very essentially bring joy and can shape the experience of a person, like in your case, your experiences. So I would really like to stress this fact that it is about positive reinforcement and reaching and just adding to the community and educating ourselves. But I'm going on a tangent here. It's so
No, it all makes sense very much. So
I don't know if you have anything else you want to share with us. I kind of exhausted my main questions, but there's just so much to say, and I don't want to restrict you in any way. Like I'm being mindful of the time. We're close to 1 hour, but if you have, yeah, anything else that you want to mention, or some recommendations, some life advice, anything really that you would like to say.
no, I think it's that thing of very much people to not let the sort of the stigma, the attitudes hold you back. Yes, life's going to be a bit more of a challenge if you're not fitting into the ideal model, but we're not going to get change if people hide away. And I think it's great to have people talking, or to even just to, and if people aren't there, it's realize that there are allies everywhere that you can take advantage of. You'll find them. You won't find them if you're not out looking for it. And but that this is the whole thing is we can't just focus on our own particular issues. Sort of that ultimate liberation from the past. We have to take into account all these different groups. So I've got that. I might be I'm white and middle class from Scotland, university educated, but it doesn't mean that I don't work with and support my friends who come from very different backgrounds, which is how I find myself working with asylum seekers and sort of working and helping people use my privilege to help other people in their areas. And then at the same time, there are people who, you never know, they will have their own privileges in areas that they can help you. And it's that sort of working together is important, and working across all the different intersectional identities. But it's needing that positivity rather than that fear that giving someone else some rights is going to impact on you. Like inherently, most of these rights that everyone's looking for, the rights that people are looking for, are not inherently harmful. Yes, any right or privilege can be misused, but if we use that as a metric for whether a right should be granted or not, there would be nothing, because even the most harmless item can be used to do harm if someone's got the intention. But there are other ways to deal with it than denying people rights is not the way to deal with these things. I think that's sort of it. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, that was absolutely lovely, and I subscribe to everything you said. Like, indeed, it's about this positivity, not fear, and this whole idea of potential harm, and think everything can be like, if we proceed on the assumption that something might have even the slightest risk, we wouldn't be living, because life is a risk in itself, everything that we do, literally. So yeah. You perfectly said, denying people's rights and basic rights, because those are really like essential core rights, is certainly not the solution. But I think that really, as a very last remark before I wish everyone a lovely evening, is that there is much fertile ground for positive action. So I would encourage everyone to think about those things, and about small ways to engage your community. It doesn't have to go to parliament or sign a petition or go for judicial review, appealing this, appealing that. Just start talking with the people around you and very positively and nicely try to get, or even yourself, to get educated on certain matters. And I'm sure that there will be a change that will come organically. So this, again, this positive message that there is much to be done, but it can be done very, I don't want to say smoothly, but certainly positively. So yeah, to end on a positive note, as you can say. And then a very last remark, a thing that I find very nice to see. So me and Kay were actually in class together at some point. I think, was that 2 years ago in an immigration and asylum class? Was that?
Yeah, which is why you know who Maria is, yeah.
For me, I am having now a very positive experience because I am educating myself on gender identity issues and the overlap with human rights or disability rights, mental health, and so on. And I just randomly bumped into Kay's profile online and we reconnected, and then this digital platform allowed us to have this conversation. So this is exactly what's happening nowadays, these fast connections that bring positive change. So I'm absolutely enthusiastic, and I love this conversation, Kay. And I thank you so, so much. And I'm sure we will keep in touch. Yeah, I guess thanks everyone for joining us. This will of course be posted. So it will be posted on Instagram and on YouTube. So it's accessible at any time for you and for everyone. And yeah, thank you very, very much for a lovely.
And thanks for having me. Okay. Bye-bye.